Welcome everyone to this edition of DCD Discover Dialogues. We're very delighted to have Bageshree Vaze as our guest today. Before we start, I just wanted to introduce myself. I'm Amy Bowring. I'm the Executive and Curatorial Director at Danse Collection Danse. And I wanted to acknowledge that where we are in Danse Collection Danse's office is the land that belongs to the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabeg, the Haudenosaunee, Métis, and the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. It has been a site for human activity, including dance, for at least 15,000 years, and we are very grateful to all of the caretakers, both recorded and unrecorded, of this land and of Turtle Island. Today, the meeting place of Toronto, or Toronto, is still the home of many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to work and dance in the community on this territory. And now I would like to welcome our guest, Bageshree Vaze. So Bageshree is the inaugural DCD Artist Researcher in Residence. She is an Indo-Canadian dance artist, musician, and writer. She's the artistic director of Pratibha Arts, which is an organization that enhances the cultural fabric of Ontario through dance and music productions that often have influences from South Asian cultures. Bageshree is an award-winning Kathak dance artist, including being winner of the 2010 KM Hunter Award in Dance. And also as a vocalist, she has 5 CDs or albums to her credit. In 2004, she was named an MTV India Ubbarta Sitara, which means rising star. And I'm sure Bageshree will correct me if I said that incorrectly. And her work has been presented in major festivals around the world, including the Canada Dance Festival. In 2022, Bageshree was, of course, our inaugural artist researcher in residence. She was also a co-recipient of the Dora Mavor Moore Award for Outstanding Original Sound Composition in the Dance Division. And she recently choreographed and performed in a series of Kathak dance videos produced by the Aga Khan Museum and Pratibha Arts. So welcome, Bageshree. We're delighted to have you here today to talk about the residency. I'll just explain a bit about that residency. So the idea was that we wanted to encourage artists who were choreographing to think about using archival research as a part of either their choreographic process or as an impetus or idea for new choreographic work. And so we supported Bageshree's research, which was looking at the sort of roots of South Asian dance in St. John's, Newfoundland, by providing her some of the contextual knowledge that she was looking for about the sort of earliest visibility of South Asian dance in Canada. So that started with touring artists in the 30s and 40s, such as Uday Shankar, Anandan Shivaram, and then also materials on artists who settled in Canada and helped to establish forms like Kathak and Bharatanatyam here, such as Reena Singha and Menaka Thakkar. So that was sort of some of the work that we were able to help Bageshree with. And I'm going to turn it over to you to let you tell us about the research and the steps you took and how your residency went and what you got out of it.
Thank you, Amy. I'm delighted to be here, and I'm so happy to see everybody online, although I can't see your faces right now. But yeah, this residency opportunity coincided with a project that I was embarking on to look at the history of how I came to learn actually Indian dance in St. John's, Newfoundland. And it was fortuitous that Danse Collection Danse was starting to support artists, researchers in this way. And I was looking for exactly what you just said in terms of the context of, when I was growing up in the 80s, in St. John's, Newfoundland. I kind of knew about what was happening in the rest of Canada, but it was a very different time because we didn't have the tools of technology and communication that we do today. And certainly when I started learning Indian classical dance, when I started learning South Indian classical dance, because that's what I was introduced to in St. John's, I did not have any kind of visual context for what I was learning other than the community that came out of St. John's and that still exists in St. John's, and then videotapes that eventually came of Hindi movies, and but it was a very different time. And so to have a global understanding, the kind of global understanding that we have now, and the access that we have now, is so, it's just such a different time. In some ways, I'm grateful that I grew up at a time when there was no TikTok and Instagram and everything wasn't online, because it actually made us search and to really consider what we were learning and how we were connecting with our ancestral culture. So in 2017, there was a huge dance history project that took place in Newfoundland to look at Newfoundland dance history. And a lot of the artists, there were 21 artists, they were all white. And a lot of the artists had moved out of Newfoundland. And, that's kind of the same story for even myself and a lot of the girls that I grew up with who were learning Indian dance. People, the thing with St. John's, Newfoundland, or Newfoundland in general, is that a lot of the Indian population will come and live there, but then eventually move to bigger cities, other parts of Canada or the United States. But I had learned about this dance history project, which completely did not take into account any other dance history of Newfoundland other than white contemporary dance. And it was just another reflection of what we've always been dealing with in history in terms of the erasure of non-white dance, non-white culture. And, we've come to a moment in time now that has taken too long, where people are consciously trying to redress the past. And so it was, it was one of those things that I was aware, because I grew up in St. John's, and that's how I was introduced to Indian classical dance. I just sort of took it for granted. It was something I benefited from, and the establishment of the Hindu temple, it still exists, and there's still a very active community. But this gave me an opportunity to really look at how did it actually all start, and really go into the history of it. So it led me down this path of not just reconnecting with some of the people I grew up with who I was not necessarily in touch with, but also learning about how the Hindu temple came to be. So I don't want to spend the whole hour talking about this because it's quite a complex history, but just to give you a synopsis, the Indian dance school that started actually in the late 1970s in St. John's came out of, if you look at the history of how Indians came to Newfoundland, my parents, for example, were doctors, and they were part of this generation of immigrants who were actually invited into Newfoundland, into St. John's, because of Memorial University in particular, because there was not enough of a local population to fulfill all the roles of the professors, the doctors, the professionals, basically. So my parents were part of a generation of professionals who came to Canada and the United States, and not necessarily thinking that they're going to stay there for very long, but they eventually, they really loved the community and and they just love St. John's. And this is why I think that it's really unfortunate that when dance history projects take place that erase, other cultures, it's such a detriment to what St. John's and Newfoundland is. Because I can honestly say that I've never grown up, I never experienced racism in the sense of people making you trying to feel bad about your culture or your background. It was always celebrated. And I'm going to show some pictures that capture some of those moments in time. So my parents were part of a very small community of Indians, and they used to just start gathering on weekends in people's houses and they had like these temple services. So they do like a lot of it was very attached to Hinduism and Hindu culture, and they wanted their children to learn the stories and the mythology of our background to help us keep some kind of connection with India and with Indian culture. But it was one particular person, Sneh Chakraborty, who kind of took up this mantle of establishing a temple, a space where we could actually congregate, because we would sort of congregate at different people's houses, and that went on for a few years. So her husband was on, there was an association called the Friends of India, and he was able to sponsor a Swami to come and visit and establish the Chinmaya Mission. So Chinmaya Mission is attached to a particular Swami in India, but this became the organization, and they had an ayah. So an ayah is like a nanny, because they had immigrated from Tanzania, and they brought with them their nanny for their children. Now that nanny, her name was Malik Walji, she bought this shack in Mount Pearl. And she decided, she was so inspired by what they were doing that she decided that she was going to donate this shack to be used as a temple. So here was a Muslim woman who was so, she just was enchanted with what was happening and what she saw around her, that she gave this old shack that was falling apart. And I've been trying to locate pictures of what the outside looked like. But anyway, that became our home. And as part of that, the Chakrabortys sponsored Menaka Thakur to come to Newfoundland. So she actually came to perform one year in St. John's at Holy Heart Auditorium. And I believe this was like you actually found me I think the paper clipping.
Yeah, the newspaper
this Indian
clipping.
classical dance performance, right?
Yeah.
So they had seen her perform somewhere in Toronto, and they were impressed, and then they invited her to come. And so as part of the temple's constitution, it was one of their principles was to support cultural activity. So they got a grant from the government to sponsor Menaka Thakur to come twice a year and start teaching Indian dance classes. And that's how I was introduced to Bharatanatyam. And that was in I think in 1979, 1980, around that time. After Menaka Thakur she came for a few years, and we would, perform around town. We were always, I grew up basically being parts of groups that would perform at like the Multicultural Association night. We were always invited to like the regatta and, different events around town as representing the Hindu temple community. And so then later she stopped coming. Another teacher from Michigan, Sudha Chandrasekhar, started coming and teaching the classes twice a year. And while I was learning from her, that's when a few of us did what we call an Arangetram, which is a graduation recital in Bharatanatyam dance. And that was in 1988. So I'm going to show you a couple of pictures that I have. I'm going to share screen. Okay, so I just, we have so many visuals of things that, of all those moments. So even though we didn't have the technology that we have today, somehow we found a way of documenting all this. So let me just find. I went looking for, there was a picture, and I know I've seen it, but I can't find it yet. Because of moving so many times, it's been one of those things that, okay, yeah, so here we go. This is, have I shared no, I haven't shared my screen yet.
No, not yet.
Okay. Okay, so this is me in my first Bharatanatyam costume. So this was when Menaka Tucker came. Okay, and so you can see the 1970s, 80s furniture around me in front of our fireplace. This was a blouse that my mom stitched because we couldn't get costumes from India. And this is one of her saris that was wrapped like a pant thing, right? So I had pretty good positions then too, huh? And then, you know, we have any number of photographs of our performing years, but I have yet to locate all of those. But I'm going to share this letter that I received in 1988 from the then premier, Brian Peckford.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, Brian Peckford was the premier. So he sent me a letter as the first student from the Indian ethnic community in Newfoundland to accomplish this this endeavor. I was the first girl from Newfoundland to do an Arangetram, and at that time it was quite a rare thing. Now it's you know there's Arangetram seasons that go on in the summertime of cranking out all these graduations, but it's great. These were the beginnings, but I want to share some other clippings that came at that time. So throughout our youth, there was often the Evening Telegram, which is a local paper, would come and you know, take pictures. So this was a picture that I found from 1987 in the Evening Telegram when I think I was performing at somewhere international students. So if you read, it's interesting if you look at the paragraph that, okay, this is my mother, who's actually on this call, but she probably won't come on video, shares what we were joking about was we're like, that guy is taking our picture. He better not be from the Evening Telegram or from the paper. And I was like, no, we don't want our picture of the paper. So if you see down here, the women dressed in traditional ethnic costumes to celebrate the event. The International Student Society was formed at MUN in 1981 to foster friendship and greater understanding among foreign students and the Canadian people. Right. So it's interesting how, you know, this concept of who were the Canadian people, right? But like I said, that I never felt that there was, you know, there was always a lot of curiosity from, if we want to call the local white people, right? And there was this real, like I still am always sort of marveling at the integration of the Indian community or the Indian cultural aspect of St. John's. So even in grade 4, it so happened, I think we were doing, if I remember correctly, we were doing like countries of the world, and it was like a parade. And so my grade 4 class happened to be doing India. And so we had to pull out all our saris for all my friends to to wear. So if you can see, that's me, and that's how is she related to you, Ashley?
So she's my cousin-in-law. She married my cousin Ian. So it's Ashley Harvey, now Power.
Yeah, so we had such fun with it, you know, and it was like everybody was so excited to try on these different clothes, and we had the India flag, you know. So it's trying to compile some of these visuals. I remember how much fun we had as a community too, and there's a couple of pictures that I found from our old temple when we used to do performances. So it's actually right now, in fact, the festival commemorating the birth of Lord Ram. Okay. So one of the gods in Hinduism. And so what would happen was there'd be, you know, for Diwali, there all these different functions, we would do things, and then sometimes they would want us to perform something, dance, right? And it wasn't just the girls from the Indian dance community that would, you know, perform. We would have to get guys because we were enacting stories. So, you know, you'll see in countries like Indonesia, they have enactments of mythological tales of the Ramayana, right? So the how Ram was born and how he defeated this evil demon and that kind of thing. So I'm just going to show you, it sort of speaks to how we made the boys sort of get involved and dress up, and we did these enactments of these stories, but also how we congregate in the temple. Okay, so this is, get this up. Where is it? Here we go. Okay, so this is in front of the Krishna. So if you see the Krishna idol in the background, okay. So the lady I was telling you about, Sneh Chakraborty, who established this temple, she bought this statue with her first paycheck from Janeway Hospital. So she was a doctor working at Janeway Hospital. So it was, you know, it was just a few individuals who decided to put their money into this structure. This was the main room of the temple. And, you know, I've been watching this series Pose lately, which is all about ballroom culture of the 70s, 80s in New York. And, you know, the same thing happened in Toronto with the LGBT community. And one of the characters is like, why do we want to go back to these sweaty, airless ballrooms? Like now we're, you know, we have to get out of this. But we had this sweaty, airless room at the temple where everybody would sit down. And then, so these are the boys dressed up as, you know, different. So this is Lord Vishnu and then Lakshmi. And then what happens in the story of the Ramayana is that all the gods, like the goddess of earth and Mother Earth, and they all come to Vishnu and they say, there's this really bad demon, you need to be born on earth. And so Vishnu decides to be born as Lord Ram. And so I wanted to show you another picture because you can't see too many heads in there, but we used to be a bunch of people packed into this really small room. And still somehow we made it happen. Okay, so here's another one where you'll see that this was actually one of, I think I don't even know what was happening, like what I was getting, but I was being presented. But you see all these people sitting down, and that's how we congregated and would watch our performances. So we had a number of, even though we had the 2 weeks at Easter vacation and then in summer vacation of actual dance classes throughout the year, myself and my friends in the other girls in the dance classes, we'd be performing either in the temple, which was our, you know, our space that we, you know, we could do whatever we want. We felt it was our weekends. Basically, our Indian culture came to life on the weekends mostly, right? That was, and most of us didn't go to the same school. So it was also our chance to see each other. But then we were also performing out, you know, like I said, at the Multicultural Association events and around town. And I wanted to show you that the new temple now is a huge structure. That was always the dream, that we had this old temple, but there was always the idea that it's going to lead to our own temple. And there was like many years of fundraising. And so you'll see, this is what the new temple looks like. Sorry, it's taking me a while to get all these up. Okay, so this is the new Hindu temple, which is now on Penny Lane. And so the dance school also, you know, existed for a number of years, but it stopped in 2004. And like I was saying, that what happens with the Indian community is that my parents were one of maybe 4 or 5 families who actually did stay for more than 30 or 40 years. But most of the Indians, because they're associated with the university or they come to do their residency in medicine, they don't necessarily stay for very long. They'll move on to Ontario. And most of the girls who I grew up with, they now live in Ontario or other parts of Canada. So I'm just going to show you, though, that I think twice a year at the temple, they do dosa dinners. Okay, so this is one of the dosa dinners. So you'll see some very happily fed people, Newfoundlanders there. And they're probably the most popular thing. Like, so apparently the temple, if it needs to raise money, it has a dosa dinner because it's mostly non-Indians who come, and that's how they raise their money. So as my dad called it, it's their cash cow, basically. So anyway, that's just to give you some context of how the Indian community and the Indian dance school sort of, you know, came about, went through its own evolution over time. So it wasn't just myself who did my arangetram. There were 3 other girls, the same from the same generation. And then later in 2000, around that time, there were the next generation, or like the younger generation of girls who also did their graduation. So one of them we actually held in St. John's at the Mun Music School. And so I actually conducted this, and my guru, my Bharatanatyam guru from India, his nephew came to actually help conduct this. And I think Lata Pada is on the call. So Vicky, Hari Krishna Kalyana Sundaram. Let me just share this. So there was a really nice write-up done. Like I was saying, that the Evening Telegram would always come to, cover whatever was happening. So this is, if you see on the right, this is Bhavna Kaushik, who was doing her arangetram, and that's me conducting on the side there. So they did quite a nice, but if you look at the headline, Ancient Dance Evolve. And so, there was never this sense that what we were doing was just antiquated or traditional. We were helping it evolve, actually, by our own interpretation of dance, of what we learned from our gurus, and then taking it forward. And that's what I've tried to do with my life. So last year, when I started this residency, I was also embarking on compiling the actual material that we would have learned in the 80s and 90s. So the dances, because I perform mainly as a Kathak dancer, and not as I don't do Bharatanatyam, or I don't perform it in the same way. I sometimes use it for choreography, although it keeps bringing me back to it. So I put together a team of musicians, and we did a 10-day residency at the Mun Music School. And our dear friend, and he's probably one of the best musicians in the world, Bill Brennan, who is associate professor at the music school, he was able to get us the space to do this creation. So myself, my husband, Vineet Vyas, who's a tabla artist, and a young musician, Dweet Hathi, who lives in Toronto, but he's originally from Ahmedabad. We tried to recreate some of the material. So I'm going to show you we have some audio recordings, but they're pretty rough. But basically, we're putting together the elements of music and a production that celebrates this history. So you'll see this was a composition written by Pandit Ravi Shankar that we used to dance to a lot. And in fact, my daughter is performing this dance next week as part of her school show. So Bill and Dweet, we all sat down and we basically charted the entire thing. It was pretty arduous because some of this material is so complex. And that's what we realized, that we were, at that time, we didn't even realize what we were doing, or that we were the inheritors of such a great heritage and such a rich culture of music and dance, both South Indian as well as North Indian. And it was all out there somewhere. But we knew that it was like, my father had this Festival of India record that I would listen to, and I just saw this entire spectrum of so many years of history that had gone behind it, so many artists and generations of artists. And still, in this small little shack in Mount Pearl, somehow we were able to bring it to life. And I think that that's like the testament to what great art is over so many years, that it can go to any corner of the world. And people think it's so unlikely a place to have it in Mount Pearl or St. John's, Newfoundland. And, when I hear these kind of comments that I had no idea there was Indian dance and stuff, I can't believe it, because as far as we knew, we were completely visible. We were not hiding anywhere. But the racism that exists is, I think, very subtle in the way that this perception or assumption that this isn't part of dance history, and that what was happening, what we were doing, wasn't part of what dance history of Newfoundland is. So, you know, now I'm hoping to get this actually come to life on stage. And a lot of that also will include interviews that I've done with a lot of the girls that I grew up with. And, you know, like the experience that I had was everybody reacts to an experience differently. So some of the discussions that I had were really, really enlightening, because I didn't realize, in particular with one of my you know, my friends at the time who was going through this, how much racism she was actually experiencing in her school. And because I said, like, it wasn't something that I would have faced, but her experience of growing up was very different. And what dance did for her was actually empower her. And so I think that I take for granted that we had this Indian dance school, and that led me to go on and pursue it further. But I think if we hadn't had it, our own identity of who we were as Indo-Canadians would have been very, very different, because we were so empowered by the community that we had. And because we had these dance classes and this great art that we were able to access, that I think it would have been very, my whole sense of myself, and for a lot of the people I grew up with, would have been very different. And because now you can access it with the technology, there are a lot more Indians around, and now St. John's too. Like the brown population, shall we say, has increased so much. Like, even I noticed it last year when I was there. Basically everywhere you go, there's so many more new immigrants coming, and it's really changed the face of the place that it is. So for it to not be visible on stage does not make any sense in terms of representing that particular cultural demographic. Okay, I've talked a lot. So, do you have any
I love that about you, that
I just realized it's 1:30.
No,
maybe you can direct my next answer somewhere.
Well, there were two things that I wanted to come back to. So one is sort of, I guess, a little more factual, just so I understand. When people like Menika, for example, came out to do training with you, it would be in short spurts. So what maintained your training in between those visits? Because obviously, you know, to achieve what you were able to achieve, you must have been dancing fairly constantly.
Well, that's like I was saying, I was showing you those other sort of like off year functions. Yeah, that we would basically, then we would, you know, either practice at the temple, like during the Sunday school, just the dance students. But then if we had to prepare for these functions, we would have extra practices at like our each other's houses, or we would use the temple.
Right. But there was no, like, was there a grown-up to direct that? Because
not really.
Right. Okay.
No, I mean, so there was always I was actually not, like, I was younger when I started, so there was an older group of students. So they would help the younger students, and I did the same thing when I became the oldest students, like basically the last year of high school. And then we would conduct like the artevu, the step classes with the younger students, and we had to just keep it going. You know, that's the thing with any sort of marginalized community or artistic practice. You don't wait for the structure, the infrastructure to allow it to happen. We don't have the luxury of that. But what we did have was the temple. So if we had not had that center, I think it would have been a lot harder.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because like for so many genres of dance throughout the 20th century, we see that where, like, in rural communities where the dancers, no matter what the form is, are sort of outside the sphere of the general public. It's the teenagers who help the younger kids, and then they become teenagers and they help the next group. And yeah, like, people just found a way to do it, even though there wasn't sort of that one teacher who could consistently keep everyone going. That's interesting. Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about was, so I know you had done several interviews and oral histories with people, and I just wondered, like, what it was like for you. I mean, I guess it's you're retracing your own steps in this process in a way. And I just wondered if coming, you've moved away from there for a while now. So just that sort of coming back and revisiting that personal history as an adult, like were there sort of eureka moments or revelations or just changes in perspective in that process for you?
Well, like I think that, like I said, a lot of the community has changed, right? Because the people that I grew up with a lot have moved away, and it's very sort of transient in terms of people staying for very long. Even in some of those photographs, we don't even remember who some of those kids are because they would have just been there for a couple of years or something and then they left. So we don't even remember their names, right?
Yeah.
But I think that it's not so much the people, but when I had to think about the material that we learned and that influenced me, because I spend so much time in India too, and I've seen so many now um, sort of interpretations of what people consider traditional repertoire and new sort of like expressions, variations on it. It made me realize that the some of the material that we learned was actually the best. Like I'm so grateful that that we were able to hear those compositions, those particular compositions, and I think it's a credit to Sudha Chandrasekhar who eventually conducted our Arangetrams, and she herself as an artist had so much knowledge of other styles of dance, of music, and that's the thing that this knowledge of music is so integral to Indian classical dance practice that because of following the Western sort of cultural system, it's become very separated. But if you look at, Pandit Ravi Shankar, and in fact, the archival material that you found of the brochures of Uday Shankar, so Uday Shankar was Pandit Ravi Shankar's older brother,
Yeah.
but you see in that the list of dancers, and one of them was Ravi Shankar. And he went on to become this great sitar master. And so a lot of the music he composed, however, was because of his knowledge of dance. And so this integration was so important, is so important. It's part of my practice, but I would say that even Sudha Chandrasekhar, because of her knowledge, I think we were so lucky to get that I think that I have seen other schools, I've seen in India, in Toronto, in other parts of the United States, but we always had this perception that what we were doing was like, we're like these country villagers, or, like, because we're from this small place and like, it must be like in Toronto, it must be like this. But really, it made me realize that we were so lucky to have the material and learn what we did and what we were able to do with it without having that without being exposed or knowing what was happening in other places.
Right. And so what made you choose to switch from Bharatanatyam to Kathak?
Well, I never switched,
Okay.
right? Like I think
you brought the other one, but when you perform now,
yeah, it's
tend to perform from the Kathak vocabulary. Right?
Well, I did my Arangetram in Michigan, and then I always had the sense that because it happened that I went to India in 1990, and for Sudha Chandrasekhar's teacher, I went to see just to take some classes. And I really felt like it was important for me to not just have my Bharatanatyam training in Canada and, like for the pockets of time that I did, and to really, if I was going to make sure that I understood and I could do this dance style properly, I wanted to spend time in India. So I got scholarships, the Shastri Indo-Canadian scholarship to go and start with a year. But it was always then when I started to see all the other types of classical dance in India. And I was so lucky at that time, to have seen such great masters of all different styles of dance and music that, I always was drawn to Kathak. And this was before I had even seen it properly performed. But then when I saw it properly performed in India, And I was like, there was just something about it. I just felt like I should be doing it. And because I am learning, I still study North Indian classical music, which is the Kathak is a North Indian, uses North Indian classical music, whereas Bharatanatyam uses South Indian. It just felt more natural, or like I would have a lot more agency in that particular style. But, a friend of mine, Jahanara Akhlaq, who lived in Toronto in the 1990s, we were performing together, and she, as well as a couple of our other friends, were always like, why are you like, yes, you're really good at Bharatanatyam, but you're not doing what you really want to do. And so I had a Chalmers Fellowship in 1998 to go back to India. And it was an opportunity for me to, I had met Pandit Birju Maharaj ji, who was the living legend of Kathak dance up until last year when he passed away. And they had performed in Toronto, and then I saw them in New York at Carnegie Hall as part of, at that time, it was the 50 years of India's independence. And so they did this big extravaganza show, and I met them after, and I was like, I think if I want to do this, I want to learn your style. And so they were like, okay, well, we're in Delhi. And so then I decided to go to Delhi, where I had no relatives, but by my great fortune, one of our family friends knew the woman who ran a women's hostel just down the street from the Kathak school where Maharaji taught. And so I was able to get accommodation. So it was just taking that leap of faith that, okay, let me see if I can do this. And it wasn't with the idea that I'm going to switch. But then once I got into it, it was this road that I just continued to go down and continue to traverse.
Right. Yeah, great.
But I don't think that, I think when you're learning something, it's important to not try and do too many things at one time. So I know that when I started really training in Kathak, you basically, one of my friends was like, because he did Odissi and Kathak, and I said, so how do you not mix them up? He was like, no, when you're in Kathak, you forget the other thing, right? You forget about the other dance style. So there's a lot of, when it comes to training, sometimes the ability to forget is actually very, very good. Like you forget the rest of the world. You forget about the fact that you only have an hour to do this. So when I do Kathak dance, I don't think of Bharatanatyam. When I do Bharatanatyam, I don't think of Kathak. So
Right.
The sort of thing.
I see. And if you're choreographing new work, do both languages feed into your new choreography, or do you say, okay, this is going to be a Kathak work, or this is going to be a Bharatanatyam work?
It really depends on what the work is.
Right.
Last year, for example, when I was working with the School of Toronto Dance Theatre, because of contemporary and modern dance, ballet training, Bharatanatyam, because of like the half sitting position, it just sort of makes more sense if you're combining aesthetics, to choose what's appropriate, because Kathak is very, very specific to tabla language. And if you do not have an understanding, or, like if you don't think rhythmically, everything that dictates what Kathak choreography is. Because, there is a movement vocabulary, but really the whole approach is very different from Bharatanatyam. That the approach to Kathak is all about this dialogue with tabla language and how to interpret the rhythmic runway that you're trying to go down.
Right, I see. Yeah.
Yeah, and Bharatanatyam, the South Indian classical dances are temple dance forms, right? So a lot of it is enactment of mythological stories, even though they have that in Kathak as well. But there's much more emphasis on the abhinaya, the storytelling aspect that's interweaved with the physicality of the movement. But again, it's also, the being true to the aesthetic requires South Indian classical music, the Carnatic system of music, which is very specific as well. So, basically everything has been done in terms of intersections, but I think choreography should try to honor what is appropriate for that particular context.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Great. Now you've got an event coming up in Hamilton. Do you want to tell us a bit about that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I guess that's sort of like the intersection aspect as well, right? It's a combination of Kathak and flamenco dance.
Mhm.
So, Carmen Romero is a wonderful flamenco artist, and it's actually her initiative actually, in terms of this collaboration for this particular on Sunday at the Hamilton Conservatory of the Arts. So a few years ago, we had done a collaboration as part of the Aga Khan Museum's Flamenco Festival. Every year they do a Duende Festival, the Flamenco Festival, and Carmen she's performed many times. And it was just a conversation that Carmen and myself were having with Amir Ali Alibai, who's the performing arts director at the museum. And he was really interested in this Kathak flamenco combination. And it's not anything new. It's been done so many times. If you go on YouTube, you'll find any number of Kathak flamenco collaborations. And I had kind of done, I want to say kind of done collaborations with flamenco in the past, because it was so brief and so just not like 5-minute pieces, right? With a couple of flamenco dancers I'd done. But there was always this, a lot of times these collaborations, you'll see that it's one dancer doing his or her own thing and the other dancer doing her own thing. And then they just sort of, you can choreograph something together, right? And I've done that a lot, with Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Bharatanatyam, Odissi, Kathak, Odissi, like even within Indian dance styles, right? And would have done that with the previous flamenco collaborations. But it's a credit to Carmen that she really wanted to pursue this idea of trying on each other's styles. So actually me doing flamenco, her doing Kathak. And so that's why it's called Dance a Mile in My Shoes / Bells. So in 2019, when we did this project as part of the museum's festival, she was very insistent that she was like, what size shoes do you wear? What's your shoe size? And I was like, why? Because the idea of dancing with shoes on stage is just so, even to go on stage with shoes is just so, it's just so wrong for us on a certain level. Like it's not, it's like the stage is this sacred space. And so when we dance, it's a sign of disrespect to wear your feet, to wear your shoes on stage. Just like if you were going to a temple, you would never wear your shoes inside. And and then it doesn't also make sense to wear shoes for what we do, because the whole aspect of footwork is to get the sound from the feet. Right. So, but because we were going to try on each other's styles, it was like, okay, she was like, no, you have to wear shoes and you're going to do flamenco. Right. And it's just been such an opportunity to really understand that other style, because otherwise I would have just done my Kathak part. She would have done her flamenco. We would put some music together and that's that, right? So this is really a collaboration, which has allowed me to also understand repertoire of flamenco, and so I'm dancing this piece called Tientos, and then she's also going to do a rhythmic exchange with tabla, with bells on her feet. And so it's a lot of fun. We have a great team of, Vineeth, my husband, is on tabla, and Nicholas Hernandez on flamenco guitar, and she's got a singer from Montreal, Alexandra, who's going to be performing. So we've now kind of, after the pandemic, we've sort of revisited the piece and doing a few things a little differently, but it's the same sort of idea of trying out each other's styles and bringing them together.
Yeah. And how do you find the shoes? How do
Well,
you wearing the shoes?
yeah, it's very like I wear shoes anyway to go outside,
of course,
and I have many types of, but it is like even just moving across stage with shoes is obviously challenging, because I'm not used to moving that way. But it's, I think that I was talking to somebody about this who's doing a write-up on it. I think that this idea of when we get too caught up in our own comfort zone is actually very dangerous. And because I grew up in Newfoundland, you know, I've always sort of been, I've never known anything other than being an outsider in a sense. Like even in dance, in Indian classical dance, you know, doing Bharatanatyam, I'm not from, I don't have, I'm not, I don't have South Indian background, right? So even the language is a foreign thing to me, but I never got freaked out that there's this other, you know, culture and I can't figure out my way in it, because I was like basically just thrown into it. So you have to like adapt, you have to learn, and you have to figure out, understand that other language. So, and same thing with Kathak to a certain degree, because I didn't come from a Kathak background. Then all of a sudden I'm coming from, and then going to India and learning dance, I'm a foreigner because I'm from Canada, right? So I've never known anything than being other than what the
Right.
environment is, right? So to go into the flamenco sphere, I just think it's great. I think it's like, wow, I get to go to this other country and see this other landscape. And I think that, you know, what's happening a lot in the world politically, or I think this idea of not being comfortable in your environment because all of a sudden there are these different people around, or you're not the one in charge, is what really where problems exist, politically and culturally. So I think we all have really great opportunities to not be just caught up in this one cultural element, and to really discover and to try on other styles, try on other languages.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. It is one of the amazing things about being here, is that, you know, the world has come here. The first peoples of this land are here, and everybody's culture is so rich. And if there's anything I've learned in exploring dance history in Canada, it's that people bring their dancing with them. And,
Right.
you know, and we have to know that if there were people, there was dance, right? It's just such an inherent part of our humanity. It's always there. So yeah.
Well, yeah, I think, and I mean, so Indian classical dance, you know, like flamenco, the thing that they have in common is that they are very much diasporic dance cultures. So, you know, even what happened in Newfoundland was diasporic. It wasn't that we brought our dances. It wasn't like the adults brought their dances with them and then they started doing this. It was, let's try and interpret our culture through dance. And so then they had Menaka or Sudha Chandrasekhar, you know, but I have to say that Newfoundland is one of the places that, even though from what I understand, there are pockets of Mi'kmaq culture, it's one of the places where the white settlers were successful in annihilating
Yes.
indigenous cultures, right? So growing up, we learned about the Beothics and the last Beothic and that kind of thing. So we understood the place that we were in. It wasn't like we were like, we're just coming here and we want to just transplant our Indian culture. We were respectful to where we were. But I think it was so great that that land that saw such bloodshed and such a horrible foundation in how it was established has led to all this cultural activity that is respectful of the land. And, you know, even like within Indian classical dance culture, the first thing that we do is we offer our prayers to and thanks to Mother Earth, to that for giving us this space. And we were lucky to have that space of the temple, and but even to be in that community that respected and welcomed it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Bageshree, this has been great. We always have such a good time chatting
Yeah.
together, and every time we do, we find there's more people that we know in common.
More people like Ashley Harvey.
You bring up people and I go, oh, I'm related to that person, which is great. But I'm excited that you'll be writing for Dance Collection Danse magazine this fall. So for those of us for those who are following, We have an annual magazine that comes out in November that you can subscribe to, and Bageshree will be contributing to that this time, which is very exciting. And I have to say, like, for this idea that had been percolating in my head about having an artist researcher in residence, I think we got off to a really great start with having you as our artist.
Thank you. I think, yeah, I think it's an opportunity that came at the right time for me, especially with what I wanted to explore. But I think that it can be an opportunity for any artist, because we're constantly looking for avenues, support. And I think that whatever idea, there's so much history, dance history, like I said, which is not just white dance history. So I think with flamenco, with any of the styles that don't get sort of portrayed or haven't been portrayed and as visible, I think that DCD I think it's great if you're able to offer artists that platform.
Yeah, well, it is exciting for us to make sure that the scope of the research and the collection and the stories that are disseminated just grows and grows. That's really important to us. But it's also, it's fun for us to help someone with those research discoveries too, right? We love it. It's part of why we're here. We love working with researchers. And when I say we, I mean me and Beth Dobson, who's our archives and programming coordinator. But it's great fun, like going down those rabbit holes and trying to help researchers, find things. And we always learn, right? We're constantly learning with everything that we discover and pull out for people. So that's a huge bonus for us.